Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so excited to be talking about the fantastic series, The Gilded Age, with Sonja Warfield, who is the co-showrunner and executive producer on the series. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about your working relationship with Julian Fellowes, because he obviously comes from the world of Downton Abbey, but this is the first time that he's doing a show like this set in America, which is kind of where you came into play.
Yeah.
And when you first started working together, how did you set about figuring out what the dynamic was going to be of how you were going to write and create the show together?
Well, because he's European, he did need that kind of American perspective, so I offer that. We started working during the pandemic like most people on Zoom. So I think our working relationship has evolved since the pandemic ended. And so I go to England, we write together. We still work on Zoom. I'll call him up, we'll talk on the phone, and we'll write something on the phone. And we just continue to work closely together, and it's a really lovely creative collaboration that I quite enjoy.
I also love that you have such a background in the comedy world, because this show is a period drama, but there's so many wonderful comedic elements.
Yes.
And I love how often it's like an undercurrent of comedy. It's not necessarily a big punchline landing, but it's just, Christine Baranski delivering these beautiful acerbic lines with such beautiful wit to them.
Yeah.
And so how have you used your background in comedy to find that specific sensibility in the show?
Well, the sensibility really is I have that same sensibility, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. So those Christine Baranski lines come to me naturally. And I just love writing for Agnes. She's one of my favorite characters to write for. And yes, obviously my comedic background helps in that. And just the wit. And so, it's also sort of that British wit and that I gravitate towards, so it just fits right along with who I am as a writer.
And speaking of Agnes, I've heard you say that one of your favorite things to do in the show is just to unravel her piece by piece,
yes.
And that from the very beginning that was one of your goals.
Yes.
And so kind of where do you feel like you're at in terms of how much more you want to unravel her? Because obviously we've seen piece by piece throughout the first 2 seasons.
Oh, there's more. Yeah. I love to put characters under pressure, because then you see who they really are. Just like in life, when people are under pressure, you see how they act. And so I love the fact that the dynamic between Agnes and Ada has totally changed. And we're really going to explore that in season 3. And Agnes is really kind of on her heels, and her life is not what she's known it to be before. And so her reactions to that are going to be fantastic.
In terms of where you wanted to carry that downfall and that shift in their relationship to at the end of season 2, did you have that in mind at the beginning of starting to create and write the season, or where did that kind of final ending point come from?
Well, Julian had that idea, and then we just all agreed, and it took off after that. I've always wanted to empower Ada. I love Cynthia Nixon's work, and I just wanted to do so much more with her. And so giving her love, because I felt like she deserved love, and she was sort of always under Agnes's thumb, I thought that could help empower her. And she did. She found her voice, with Luke's help. And then this twist at the end sets them off on a whole nother ride for season 3 that I think audiences will enjoy.
And it was such an arc for her, going through, finding love for the first time and getting married and then losing her husband so quickly. Did you and Julian talk about potential different timelines for how you wanted that to play out, or was it always in your minds that was going to be a very quick loss for her?
It was always going to be a sudden loss. And back then, it's true to history, because back then you could have an ache and have a cancerous growth that you didn't even know about, and then you are dead soon. So in terms of medicine, we wanted to stick to the authenticity of things.
And in terms of that idea of putting characters under pressure, when we look at Bertha and George's marriage, I love the way that there's kind of almost this constant cycle of, you know, something gets revealed that one of them kept hidden, and then how do they navigate through that? What does that conflict look like? And then all of a sudden, you know, there's another thing that's going to come out into the open. And so how have you enjoyed getting to play with the pressure cooker of their marriage?
Well, Carrie Coon and Morgan Spector are spectacular, as are all the other actors. I mean, I am just so grateful to be working with such fantastic, you know, actors and who are just at the top notch of their craft. So, yeah, I mean, listen, marriages go through so many different cycles, and I think despite the fact that he's a robber baron and she lives in this lavish castle, that people can relate to that because marriages have their ups and downs, and season 3, hold on, because Bertha and George have a whole new ride ahead of them, and it will be, it's going to be dramatic, it's going to be heart-wrenching, and it's going to be fun.
And it's so delicious to watch Bertha because anytime she gets a taste of any semblance of success or power, it doesn't satiate her. She always wants more.
Yeah.
Do you think there's ever a limit to kind of where that will go for her, or do you feel like you can just constantly increase it?
I think, you know, Julian said at the start that this is a show about power. And so thematically, we'll continue to explore that as long as the audiences want to keep watching. And that is true with, I think, so many just powerful people, is that once they get a taste of it, they just need more and more. It is never quenched, and they just go on to the next thing, whatever is next, you know, that they can be powerful in.
Because within that, you have different spaces that you can play around with it. You have the old money and the new money, and then you have the upstairs, downstairs element of things as well.
Yeah.
And so how does almost having this triangle that you can play with give you a lot more narrative space to play around with?
Well, you know, what I think the difference between Downton and Gilded Age is that in America, as we're seeing a little bit with Jack's character, the footman at the Brooke House, is that anything's possible, right? And so you can be a footman one day and you can, you know, be a businessman the next day. And so we're going to explore that. Mm-hmm.
I also want to talk about Dr. Erica Dunbar, who is a historic consultant on the series, because I love how you and Julian, in essence, will come up with an idea for a storyline for a character, and then you work with her and other consultants on the series to kind of look at the historical facts and then to kind of find that narrative space in between. And so what has she really brought to the process along with the rest of the historic consultants?
Well, I work, you know, hand in hand with Erica. We talk about the time period, we talk about events of the time period, and then we sort of reverse engineer and see how that can work for our characters. You know, there's a scene that I just happened to be working on yesterday, and I got to consult with Erica because what's so important to Julian and to me and everyone who's involved in the Gilded Age is the authenticity of the time period and the world. So you've got to get that right, and so we can't look at it with our modern lens. And so Erica is just such an amazing resource because she knows all of that history. And so I simply, you know, give her a call or an email, and then she can inform me about the history, about what people, even the language that people would use, because it's different. You know, our language evolves. And so she's so vital to the entire process. And the Tuskegee whole storyline was, you know, we were trying to find a storyline for Peggy and for Fortune, and Erica threw out some ideas of what was going on in that time period, and then she told us about Tuskegee, and Julian's like, that's it, I want to do that, I want to explore that. So she's vital to the process, and I enjoy working with her.
And it's such a great point that you bring up in terms of you can't look at everything through a modern lens, even though that's how we're watching it in the modern day. And Peggy's a great example of that. She's going through so much, but she can't necessarily talk about it. She doesn't have a place to unleash it. The language of how you would discuss that now just wasn't around then. And so how does that inform a lot of the emotional landscape of the show?
Well, back then people did not speak of such things like, overtly in some circles speak about sexism or racism or sort of any of the isms, because that was just accepted and that was just what society is. And so there's a lot of subtext and there's a lot of talking around things. And then we also have the actors who will have their reactions about something that in today's world is so benign, but back then was so taboo. And so much of it is in how the actors deliver it and sort of talk around it. And, Oscar's character, for example, he cannot come out. That just was not done back then. And so he's, searching for a wife because that's the path that he's going to lead. So it's very interesting about how repressed these characters are, yet, in writing it, they do have to be dramatic and express themselves to an extent. But yes, there is a lot of subjects that they just won't go down that lane yet, but with just a simple sort of expression or a word, the audience will know that, ooh, that's what they're talking about.
It also plays so much in terms of the romance or impending marriages. If you look at Gladys and kind of everything that she's going through with her parents, trying to find a suitable match, or the quick marriage and loss of a husband that we were talking about before, or even just like the real slow burn with Marion. And so you've got very different pacing. It's like you can either meet someone and end up engaged and married very quickly, or because you kind of can't act upon feelings straight away, there's this real slow burn. So does that give you kind of like quite interesting different pacing to play around with those storylines?
It does. I think with Marion and Larry, it's a friendship and they weren't looking at each other in that particular way, which I think is sort of beautiful and romantic and does still happen in contemporary times, is that there's someone who you never thought of as that until that moment. And so, yes, that's a great opportunity. But back then, the courtships weren't necessarily long, and there wasn't premarital sex with ladies, like that's just wasn't done. And so there were shorter courtships, and then, you just got married.
And you were talking a little bit about the language before, and obviously that's something that I imagine at the beginning was very judicious in terms of like going line by line and making sure it was always period appropriate. Is there a little bit of a shorthand that you feel like you've developed within yourself in terms of some of the language and some of the phrasing that you've learned along the way?
I've learned so much, and Julian knows how they speak then, and so he's taught me a lot. And first season, I wrote the word strategize, and I remember he told me, they didn't have that. They didn't say that back then. It would have to be come up with a strategy, and so I've learned the language of that world, and it's very funny because on set sometimes we all just sort of talk in Gilded Age speak a little bit because you just can't help it.
I've also heard you mention that one of the things is like when someone dies, now we'd be like, oh, they passed away, but it was like kind of there's certain language that's much more direct from that time period as well.
They're dead.
And in terms of the way that you work with Julian, kind of going back to season 1 where you started working together over Zoom and through the pandemic, and I've heard that the two of you you'd each work on a scene and then you'd pass it back and forth and do passes on each other's work. Now that you're working on season 3 at the moment together, how has that process evolved and grown with each other?
We're still doing that, and also, we'll be at dinner and then like come up with something, and then I'll go back home and write that down. So we still do write, and then we switch, and then give each other feedback and then rewrite, and then Julian has the final, comb through and pass of the script. And so it's similar, but sometimes we get to do it in person now.
And with the first season as well, with everything at that time for us, it also changed things for a lot of the departments. So it's things like the costume department were suddenly at home, but it gave them more time to research. And so are there things when you look back at season 1 that having that extra time of things being shut down for a little bit, that in a weird way were kind of a little bit of a gift to production just because it allowed a little more time to figure certain things out?
Absolutely was, especially for the costumes, because they were just at home sewing. Like they were still able to work and create. And then we were able to go back and refine the scripts and just keep working on that. And so it was a gift to be able to just make the show really what it is.
And the costumes are obviously absolutely stunning in the series, but they're so specifically telling stories about these characters and their journeys as well. So what have been some of your favorite costume kind of character journeys throughout the first couple seasons?
Practically everything Bertha wears is just stunning and amazing. In the first season, Carrie Coon was pregnant, and despite that, still those costumes I just thought were fantastic. God bless them for the corsets and everything that they have to go through to get into them. But yeah, it's, the different characters sort of have their different styles. Like Ada has the style that sometimes it's like a little military-esque, But what I really enjoyed last season was to see Peggy and her family on the roof, celebrating the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge, and just to see her in a lovely, beautiful costume as well, and her family.
And when it comes to the way that you approach the overall narrative arc of a season, I've heard you mention that it's like you always want to know what's the starting point, what's the end point, and then the question is like, how do we get from A to B?
Yes.
So working on a show like this, how do you kind of start to unravel the puzzle of, if this is where we want these characters to end, how do we make sure that we get from the starting point to there?
Well, that's what we do. So we know where we're going, and then you kind of reverse engineer it, yeah.
And what are some of the challenges in terms of working on a show that has so many characters? Because I think what you and Julian do so beautifully is you're always kind of growing all of these characters episode by episode. So even if we have a really short scene with Oscar in one episode, we're getting to know more about him. His story's moving forward, even if it's just a few moments on screen with him.
Yeah. It's really, we sit down in the beginning and we kind of track the characters and their arcs and where we want them to be this season. And so it's just about remembering to service them all. And at this point now, it's like I know them all so well, and so I as I'm writing, I'm thinking about, okay, well, what does Oscar need for this episode, or what does Marion need, and are we tracking all that? So that's just part of the job.
And obviously, with the fact that you know these characters so well, you've kind of seeped yourself in the world of the language. What are some of the aspects that going into the third season kind of still are challenges or spaces that take you outside of your comfort zone with this?
That's a good question. That take me outside of my comfort zone. That's again relying upon the historians for the accuracy, right? Because I want to make sure that it's accurate. And also I consult with Julian on things because it was a very chaste time. And so if, for example, I have two characters who might be romantic, I have to check with Julian and say, would this really happen, or is this not? Is this going too far? And so I do still need to consult with him and the historians on what is accurate, what is right historically, what's real for that time.
Yeah. Well, it's such a beautiful second season. I'm so excited that we're going to get another one, and congratulations on everything with the show so far, and thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks.